Hi everyone, and welcome to another day of PaletteMAS. Today we're going to do something quite different because I actually cannot wear eyeshadow at the moment. I have had a problem with one of my eyes, so I decided that we're going to talk about some palettes that I either was completely not interested in throughout 2024 or I'm glad I skipped out on. So if you're curious to hear my thoughts on the eyeshadow palettes I did not buy in 2024, then I hope that you will stick around and keep on watching.
Off, my dear, the forecast ain't clear, so will you?
Well, hi everyone. I haven't worn eyeshadow in 2-3 days. I don't even know. My eye today finally just subsided and looks like it's not swollen anymore. However, I do know that there's still something wrong with it because this happened a few days ago and I did go ahead and film a video and wear eyeshadow. And then the next day I woke up again with a puffy eye. So this time around, the puffy eye lasted for 2 days instead of just one. And I'm still really scared of putting on any eyeshadow because even though the eye is looking better, there's still like a bump inside and it's quite painful when I touch it. So that tells me either I have some sort of an infection or a sty or something that is still sitting in there until it completely goes away. I just don't want to chance it. I actually have a concert to go to, not tomorrow, the day after, and I really hope I'm fully better by then so that I can wear eyeshadow just, to go out, not even just for filming, but just for my daily life. But we'll see. I might end up doing something else with my makeup that day. Today, totally casual and easygoing. I have almost no makeup on my face. I have a little bit of concealer. My skin has been so dry because New York has been really, really cold this week. Of course, nothing on my eyes and just some blush and a lip gloss. Totally chill. I got back from work. I edited yesterday's video, which I think went up a little bit late because of my schedule. And we'll see if this video makes it on Saturday or if I end up having to skip a day and you guys might see this on Sunday. I have no idea. Before we jump into the topic, for those of you guys that are new to my channel, hi, welcome. My name is Natalia. I'm a concert pianist that loves all things makeup and beauty. And the reason I am not so happy about my eye situation is the month of December was supposed to be a month where I try a new eyeshadow palette every single day. Not palettes necessarily that I've purchased recently, but actually just brand new palettes in my collection that I have yet to try. Some of them are fairly new and some of them I've had honestly for a couple of years and they still have never made it onto my eyes. That's what the December project is about. I'm hoping to get back into that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to continue doing eyeshadow palette related videos for the whole entire month. So if you're interested in that, then please consider subscribing. Those of you guys that are returning, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I see the same faces in the comments on all of these daily videos and it just makes my heart so happy. I am so grateful that you're here. All right, without further ado, let's get into this video. I was kind of doom scrolling, I guess you could say, yesterday because I just felt awful between my swollen eye and I had some sort of a stomach bug or something that thankfully was just a one-day ordeal, but I was miserable. I had to cancel work. I basically spent most of the day in bed, completely unproductively.
Is that a word? Unproductively. Unproductive.
I was unproductive. I spent a lot of time on my phone. What can I say? So I was laying there and thinking, well, what can I do since I cannot film an actual look for the next few days? And I decided to go through the Instagram pages. I think I just went through Makeup on Your Radar too. I just decided to kind of go through the releases, which is not something I do to such an extent very often. Something I've toyed with as far as like filming those style of videos, but I always worry that that's just going to incentivize me to buy even more. And clearly I'm trying to do the opposite here. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna let myself just go through all the releases, all the things. And then I started seeing a lot of releases that either I still want or a lot that I just did not want throughout the year. I didn't go, of course, throughout the whole entire year because there would probably be, I don't know, 100 palettes we could talk about on both the things I didn't want and things I really wanted spectrum because there are just so many releases. So many releases. I really miss the simpler days when brands would release 1 or 2 palettes a year and it was so exciting. Nowadays, there seem to be at least 3 eyeshadow palettes released a day or every every other day. At some point, once I got to a big enough number for this video, I just stopped scrolling and decided I'm done. So let's talk about the 2024 palettes I didn't want this year. And I guess we'll talk a little bit about why. I have my computer right here because I film on my phone, so there's no way I can look up pictures of these and react to them unless I am looking at my computer. So if you see me typing away or looking down, then you know that that's what is happening here. I guess I'll just go in order that I wrote things down. That doesn't mean it's in order of when things were released. And we're gonna do it by brand. For some of these brands, I actually thought of more than just one palette. So even though this is supposed to be the 10 palettes I didn't want in 2024, it's gonna be a bit more than that. How do I search on a desktop? Oh, here we go. We're gonna start right away with the big one, Natasha Denona. So Natasha Denona released 3 MIDI palettes this year. She released the Golden palette, the I Need a Warm, and is it the Roxa? The Roxa? 2 out of 3 of them I was not really interested in right from the start. The Golden, I missed out on the Gold palette, the original OG Gold palette, and I still to this day regret that because that palette actually looked beautiful. But the reason for why that palette was interesting and beautiful did not get included in the Golden palette. It was a little bit too much of the same shades that definitely would be repeat shades for me in my collection. I have enough Natasha Denona where I'm sure I can replicate something similar with the palettes I already have. So I decided I'm just gonna skip out on the Golden palette. I'm trying to pull up a picture. All I'm seeing is I Need a Warm because I guess that came out more recently, and that one I did pick up, and that one I really do enjoy. That one had golds that were a little bit better suited to my skin tone. They were a little bit more, is peachy the right word? A little bit more neutral, like not quite as gold, as yellow gold. And I've heard people say that the Golden palette is actually not as yellow goldy as one would think, but I just thought it was still a little too yellow and too gold for me personally. So I went ahead and skipped on the Golden palette, and I'm really glad I did. If I really want a nice gold moment, my Metropolis palette I think would fill a void, and mine is rearranged. I have finally done something I have wanted to do for a long time and rearranged them, but you can see the top 2 rows. I mean, there's enough golds and browns to go around here where I did not feel like I need the Golden palette. Yes, I understand her shimmers are now a different formula. Yes, I understand this palette probably has more cream to powders, but I still don't think that is enough reason to justify me spending an additional $69 on colors that I technically already have. Now, the Roxa palette is a mostly purple and pink palette. For some reason, that one, just to begin with, did not really catch my eye. I mean, yes, in theory, it is beautiful. And honestly, both with the Golden palette and the Roxa palette, my favorite parts of those palettes was the design of the outer packaging, that wave. And both of those palettes have that beautiful wave. But as much as I'm a sucker for packaging, and I do occasionally cave and buy things for the packaging, $69 for packaging is just not something that I can afford. I don't think it's something a lot of people can afford, most of us. I decided to skip out on the Roxa palette, and while I've watched enough videos on it to know that the Natasha Denona Love palette is not exactly a duping the vibes for the Roxa, I barely use my Love palette. So again, if I was to try to get the vibes of the Roxa palette, I would try to do it with this one. As I said, I've seen videos and side-to-side swatches, and they're different undertones, and the Roxa palette is, of course, more purple. This definitely has more reds and pinks and only a few purples. But if I'm not using this enough, who's to say that I'm going to be using the Roxa any more than this? I don't think I would be, so it was a pretty easy skip for me. Let's talk about another heavy hitter, Pat McGrath. Pat McGrath this year did not do a mothership, but she did release one of her fairly large holiday palettes. While it looks very beautiful, let me pull it up just to see what the colors are, at least from the photos. I have not watched any videos on this palette, to be honest, but there seems to be some very interesting colors in here, some very sparkly shimmers, so maybe she did include her special formula in this specific holiday palette, because in the previous ones, she usually would include just her her regular shimmers. So I think with this one, she gave some variety on the shimmers, and that is a plus. I do remember doing a little bit of a double take with it and thinking, that looks really pretty. But then I also remembered that I have 2 of her previous holiday palettes and I barely use them. In fact, this one I've never used. I picked this up sometime this year, I think, or maybe end of last year at TJ Maxx. It still has the sticker on it. And I've been seeing quite a lot of Pat McGrath throughout this year at some of the better TJ Maxx's here in New York City. But I think between these 2 holiday palettes, I have absolutely no excuse as to why I should be purchasing any more Pat McGrath palettes until I actually use what I have. Now, I have heard that this new one, I think finally they got rid of these stupid ribbons, and that of course is nice. I mean, the ribbons are nice, like if you're gonna stand the palette up and do your makeup through it. But I don't, okay, I cannot do this together. I tried. This was, I think, the 2022 collection for the holidays, because I think in 23 she did combination of eyeshadows and face products. And I actually found one of those palettes at TJ Maxx and bought it. And then I had buyer's remorse and the next day went and returned it. That was fairly recently. And then I have the year before that, so I guess this must have been 2021. And this, I do love this palette. It's still underused. And between all of these shades and all of the shades in here, I mean, yeah, okay, so maybe they're not exact colors, but there's definitely plenty of color to go around between these 2 palettes. So again, that was not a palette that really pulled at my heartstrings for very long, and it was a pretty easy pass. I'm going through, I guess, the mainstream brands first. It's kind of all mixed up. But the third palette that I have listed on here, or at least the third brand, is Huda Beauty, and it's the Icy Nude. I don't know what it is about the Icy Nude. I did see it in store and swatched a few of the shimmers, and that horrible glitter. And I have to say, some of those shimmers did look gorgeous on my hand when I swatched it. I was like, oh, that is pretty. But even in person, overall, I just looked at it and I was like, yeah, that's a palette I can admire from afar. It just did not speak to me enough to justify, again, the high price tag, the fact that I'm probably going to use it once or twice and then put it in a drawer and it's going to be virtually forgotten. In yesterday's video, or the day before, depending on how this all plays out with my editing, I mentioned that there are enough palettes in my winter picks that have some of those icy shades. I'm sure I can recreate somewhat similar looks if I really am attracted to those, you know, ice princess sort of looks that are going around right now, those ethereal eyes with like the furry hats. And it's not a look I go for anyways very often, but if I'm really wanting to try and create that, like I'm looking right now at the Huda Instagram, and it's all about like the white earmuffs and the white hats that I remember from childhood, because of course back in Russia it was freezing and most of us had fur hats. I'm sure my mom probably still has hers somewhere. All that to say, I think I have enough. I don't have a specific palette in mind, but I have enough shades here and there where for a specific look, if I'm recreating something that I see online, I can definitely make it work. Other than those occasional looks that catch my eye, the palette itself just does not give me enough thrill and enough of that wow factor to justify getting it. So really easy skip on that one. On my list next, I first actually wrote all of Glamlight. And then I realized that there was one palette I wanted of Glamlight. And if I make a follow-up to this video of the 10 eyeshadow palettes or the 10 brands that really caught my eye and the palettes from those brands that I had to kind of really stop myself from purchasing, so palettes I really wanted but didn't buy, then I'm going to talk about that one. But let's talk about everything else, because I do have to say, while it's not everything from Glamlight that did not catch my attention this year, it's most things. All the Halloween stuff. I'm not really a scary movie gal. I think the only scary movie I've ever seen in my life was the original It, and I maybe have told this story before on my channel, I can't remember. I was a child who had just arrived to the States not too long ago, so I think between the language barrier and the whole concept of horror, which I didn't really know even existed before that, and the fact that one of my favorite toys at that time was a clown, I was absolutely petrified of that film. I couldn't even sleep with my clown for days. I don't actually think I have seen a single horror film since that one film that scarred me for life, apparently. I really could care less about all the Chuckies and the Friday the 13th and whatever else. Not to mention, to me, after a while, all of the color stories started to look the same. And maybe it's because I have no attachment to these franchises. I really don't care for any of these movies because I've never watched any of them and I have absolutely no desire to. Even the Scream movies, all of my friends loved them. We grew up with it. We were, I think, all in college or in high school or whatever. I think college when they all came out. I know everybody loves those films. I just can't bring myself to see any of them. So none of the Ghostface and Ghostface Returns and the Trick or Treat and the Halloween 2 and the Friday the 13th, none of that stuff tickles anything in me. That's always a very easy skip for me. All of the stuff that came out this year, most of it just went right over my head. Same with, they had the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Now that's a little more nostalgic. I did grow up watching that, but it's too bright for me. It has, if I recall, it's a very bright palette. In fact, I was watching somebody's video recently. It may have been Heather Austin's eyeshadow palette collection video. She was saying that, is it the Rick and Morty? There's like a giant palette that Glamlight came out with last year that was a big hit for them. And she was saying how the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air would be like a good smaller version of that for somebody that doesn't want such a large palette. To that, I was like, ooh, okay, let me look into it. I did again, and then I realized why it didn't catch my eye at all the first time around. I don't wear colors like that. I don't wear bright bubblegum pinks and neon greens and really vibrant blues. It's just not something that I'm going to get enough use out of to justify paying even the $8 or whatever that palette is now on sale for all the Black Friday sales. It's just not worth it. I prefer to get my, Starbucks drink. Because yes, in parts of New York City, it is $8 just to get a darn Starbucks drink. That's a totally other topic. We're not here for that. Then I talked about the Willy Wonka palette before because I did a whole video on the palettes from Glamlight I'm using instead of the Willy Wonka. I mean, there was the Kiss palette. That's also was very, very dark and grungy. I don't use colors like that on the regular. So Glamlight overall, I kind of just went, not this year. Nothing really caught my eye. Next up, we've got Lunar Beauty. Lunar Beauty is a brand I only have one eyeshadow palette from. I am always intrigued by them. There's been other releases that I have almost pulled triggers on, but something always stops me. Most of the time, of course, what stops me is my financial situation and the fact that I can't afford every single palette I want. That, of course, sometimes makes the decision for me. However, sometimes I ignore the voice in my head that says you need to be responsible and not charge yet another thing onto your credit card, and I still purchase things. But with Lunar Beauty, that's never been the case. Something, I guess, about their color stories that doesn't grab at me quite as much as other brands, or maybe because I just haven't fallen in love with their formula, but especially this year's collection. I am right now a very basic neutral. I have not really been wearing crazy eyeshadow in a long time, but even those two very basic palettes just did not speak to me at all. I just thought they were too bland, too blah, so similar. I didn't understand why it needed to be broken up into a day and night. Probably it could have been condensed into one 12 pan or whatever they normally do, or one 15 pan. Instead, it's two 9 pan palettes. The day palette is a lighter neutral palette and the night palette is deeper. It doesn't really have any light mattes. So for somebody like me, I would probably not like that anyways. I don't know. I just thought they were so blah and just so uninteresting, unfortunately. That release also did not really speak to me. Clarity Cosmetics is a brand that I have wanted to try for a very long time. And in fact, I got one of their palettes, like one of their free palettes that you had to hunt on their website for last year, but it came quite shattered, and even though I tried to repress some of it, it's just so messy that I keep resisting using it. Plus, The Color Story was not one I would ever choose for myself. It just was a free palette. You just had to pay for shipping. So of course, me being me, I was like, ooh, a deal. And it's still sitting around. Aside from that though, I have heard about Clarity for a while and they've been on my brain on and off for a number of years now. So when their Clarity Rain palette came out just recently and a lot of people were singing its high praises, my ears perked up. But then I looked into it more, looked at the colors, and I realized A, it's a large palette. It has 24 shades. B, it's a bit chaotic in terms of color story for me because it's almost wants to be a rainbow palette but with a bunch of neutrals. There is a muted orange and a red and pinky purple and a darker purple. There's a green shimmer. There's a blue shade. I can't remember if it's a matte or a shimmer. I think that's a matte. And then there are a ton of neutrals. It's just too much for me. It's too busy. I would probably open it up and get overwhelmed and close it and pick something smaller and simpler. That's just how I've been rolling lately. Even though I was kind of curious about it, I realized it's not for me. It's not a perfect release for me, and maybe one day in the future Clarity will release something that I absolutely cannot resist. I also remember doing a second look into the Angry Leprechaun palette because that has some greens and I love green eyeshadow, but it also has 4 bright oranges. Not only do I already have those shades, but they're a little too warm and too bright for me. And then there are 4 shades on top that are quite deep. Very deep purple, I think, if that's what I am seeing, a bright red, which I almost never wear, a burgundy, so that shade is very pretty, and then like a pinky purple shimmer or some such thing. It's just not enough shades that I would want to use on a consistent basis, so it's another one I skipped out on. The Oden's Eye holiday release. I actually purchased the Oden's Eye mystery box earlier this year. I received 3 eyeshadow palettes, 2 of which I kept, and one of them is currently in my 1,000 subscriber giveaway, which I believe ends in like 2 days. So if you want to go check that out and enter, you still have a couple of days to do so. That palette was the holiday palette from last year. It looked interesting. It's just, again, I have too many palettes, and out of the 3 palettes I received, I just felt like that's the one I would use the least. It's kind of the same with this year's holiday palettes. I still regret not buying the original 2 that they came out with 2 years ago, the Merry Christmas and Christmas Eve. This year's Christmas palette somehow just did not catch my attention. One of them felt too pastel for me. The other one I think just had, again, too many reds and dark colors and really no light blending out shades. I'm actually looking at it right now. Yeah, and the Silvery Bliss palette, the mattes are all mid to dark tone. There's only one like a peachy rosy shade, but I don't think that's enough to use with all the shimmers if I'm not going for a lot of drama. And then the Rosy Jingle palette just has too many pops of color that I don't use on a regular basis. 2 bright pinks, a yellow, and then there's like a gray and a gold, and it's just a little too all over the place for me. And then a peach. I don't think I would have enough easy looks within that palette. I would have to stare and like pick out, okay, well, I guess I can mix these 2 shades together or those 2. I right now like palettes that are a lot more simple, where more colors work together. I'm not saying that it needs to be a monochromatic palette by any means. When you have blues and pinks and yellows and grays and silvers and golds and peaches and all of that in one palette, I just get overwhelmed and very quickly give up on that palette and move on to something that is simpler. The Oden's Eye holiday palettes, unfortunately, this year were not really my jam, and that's okay because I still have 3 Oden's Eye palettes that I need to use more. I have plenty of Oden's Eye to still explore and play with already in my collection. Let's talk about Cosmic Beauty. Cosmic Beauty has a lot of palettes that I want because I have never tried Cosmic Brushes, Cosmic Beauty, whatever it is they're calling themselves nowadays. And there were definitely quite a few palettes that they released this year that I did want to buy. We're not going to talk about those today. What we are going to talk about is their latest holiday palette that they just released. It's the 'Tis the Season palette. Just looking at the color story, again, I just thought there were not enough shades here that I would feel comfortable ordering a 20 pan eyeshadow palette for. There is an entire row of purples that seems to be the color of the season. There is an entire row of pinks and reds. So that's already 2 rows I'm not using very often. There is one beautiful row of warm neutrals, but again, they're on the warmer side. I lean more towards neutrals. And then there is a green row on top, which is beautiful, but I'm not lacking greens, especially because I really like greens and I tend to gravitate towards them. So I definitely have enough of them in my collection. So this was not a palette for me. I really do want to try Cosmic Brushes, Cosmic Beauty one day. I didn't even realize, because they're a British brand, that they were doing a Black Friday sale. That was the only thing. I think they had their Muse sale on quite a good discount. Maybe it's best that I didn't know that, because I feel like if I were to pick up the Muse, then I would feel like, well, because it's shipping all the way from the UK, maybe I should get something else. We all know how quickly we can go down that rabbit hole. It's a brand that it doesn't look like I will be trying in 2024, and that is okay. Let's talk about Bella Beauté Bar, because this is another brand I have never tried, but I really want to, because everybody who does a lot of indie palette content seems to have nothing but amazing things to say about Bella Beauté Bar's eyeshadow formula. The only thing that is stopping me from ordering from them, aside from money, is their color stories. I think they're definitely geared towards the type of people who love indie shadows. I feel like most indie palette lovers don't shy away from color, and I think that is great. I'm just in that place in my life right now where I am, if anything, with each year scaling back on color as opposed to adding it into my looks, and I'm hoping that that trend of mine, my personal trend, will shift, because I love color, but for some reason lately I'm just a little bit intimidated by it. Maybe it's the aging thing, maybe it's, I don't know what it is. But for now, I'm still not in my super colorful era. So most of the Bella Beauté color stories are just a little bit much for me. They released 3 palettes that I put down on my list as those that look beautiful from afar, but were just not for me. The Ultraviolet that they did in collaboration with D'Andre Nicole, which looks stunning. If you love purples, I would say that's probably a better way to go than most of these other purple palettes that we've been seeing this year. Although Lethal Cosmetics has another one that is also really, really beautiful. I didn't put it on my list. There's too many palettes to talk about, but if I remember correctly, that palette is also quite deep and grungy. That automatically disqualified it for me from afar. I really love the way that Lethal palette looks, and this Ultraviolet palette looks stunning for people that really love their purples. Then they had the Poison Garden palette, or is it the Secret Garden? Secret Garden? Poison Garden? Or did they have both? Now, Secret Garden does have some really beautiful greens. And not just vibrant greens, but more muted olive, grungy, earthy kind of greens that I really love. It also has an entire row of beautiful neutral browns up on top. But again, it's a very large palette. And I just feel like even with this more subdued color story, like if there was a palette I would pick up from Bella Beauté Bar, it probably would be this one. Still think it's a little too much for me. And there are 6 pinks in there, and there are 2 more like poppy lime greens. I really want to try Bella Beauté Bar. If you have any of their palettes, please give me your thoughts. What would you recommend? Maybe I missed, because I haven't scoured their website in detail, but maybe I missed something and they have a palette that would be perfect for me. Now, the Poison Garden is the one I put on my list, so I found it. And this one, while again is beautiful, like that whole entire left side, that left vertical line, warmer neutrals, but at least neutrals nonetheless. The row right after that looks like cool tones, and I could vibe with that. But then we get into just a sea of really deep shades, and they're beautiful deep shades, but they're all super deep. I don't really use that amount of grays and blacks and super deep navy blues. So I just felt it's too large, it's too dark, and unfortunately, it's not for me. And then the last one, which again has a very similar situation, is I think it was called the Vamp palette. And that one also is just, it's too dark. It's got too many reds, not shades I use very often. I like cool tones, but not when they're all teetering on the side of dark gray and dark black and dark blue and brown. There's really not a single neutral blending out shade, because the lightest shade is a lavender or like a light purple, and then there's a mid-tone, light to mid-tone blue, and everything else as far as the mattes is concerned is super, super deep and dark. I'm sure for some people that is fantastic, and I'm so happy that palettes like that exist, but for me it's just not the right color story. All right, and the 10th and final brand and eyeshadow palette that I'm going to talk about today, and this is probably the only one that maybe I will change my mind on one day, because in theory it actually should be the kind of palette I would gravitate towards right now. I'm talking about the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes. In theory, I should be all about this palette. I have been really loving neutrals and cool tones, lots of lighter and mid-tone mattes, and very sparkly shimmers, even toppers, which I never used to like until earlier this year. It seems like the Mario palette has all of that and more, because then it has deepening shades for the smokier looks, which I do still like to have. I'm not saying that all of my mattes have to be super light. There is enough variety. We go from lightest to deepest with 5 beautiful shimmers. I don't know why. This palette just does not speak to me. Just like the first one last year. Maybe it is because I spent so many years thinking I don't like toppery eyeshadows, and I felt like the first one, that was its kind of claim to fame, is those super sparkly shades. And because I only got into that earlier this year, I still have that lingering feeling of that's a disadvantage to this palette rather than an advantage. This is probably the kind of palette that if I see it in person and I get to swatch it, I probably would change my mind. So to be honest, I've been avoiding seeing it in person and swatching it, because it's an expensive eyeshadow palette. I have so many to still go through in my own collection, as we very well know by now. So I'm really trying to reel it in, and I'm not doing a fantastic job on all fronts, because there have been eyeshadow palettes I have purchased in the past few weeks, both because of the Black Friday sales and actually 3 palettes that were not on any sales. And with one of them, I forgot to use a influencer code, and I was so upset with myself. I'm not saying I'm not buying anything right now. I'm not on my no buy yet. I'm seriously considering one, but in the meantime, I am still looking and I'm curious about things. But whenever I don't get that pull to really get something, it's an easy skip for me. I don't need any more excuses to get makeup. Like, clearly I am pretty good at that. I've got that down to a science. Acquiring makeup, if it was a profession, would be right up there in my credentials. I don't need more reasons to buy makeup. So whenever I can say it's an easy no for me, I celebrate that and I move on, and I try not to go back to wanting that palette or trying to convince myself into wanting that palette. Those are my 10 brands from which there have been eyeshadow palettes that I have not wanted this year. I'd love to hear yours. Were there any brands completely that you just were staying away from? I mean, I had quite a few, so that would be a separate video in itself. There's a couple of brands I just haven't supported in a while. There's a couple of brands that haven't released anything of any interest. There's a couple of brands that just really haven't released anything, period. There's lots of topics to discuss. I just thought this would be a nice, fun one to just go down memory lane and revisit some of the releases. For the most part, I tried to keep it fairly relevant to what's been going on in the past few months in the beauty community. Let me know if you want me to do a part 2. I might have to do some of these talking videos for the next few days, but we could talk about, I have a whole list of palettes I wanted but skipped. If you want to hear my thoughts on those and how I've convinced myself to skip on them, at least for the time being, and what I'm planning on using instead, then let me know. And let's just chat about eyeshadow palettes in general, because that's kind of what I'm here for this month. I've been falling back in love with eyeshadow palettes. I know the rest of the world claims to have fallen out of love with them, but judging by the number of releases, I would have to disagree. With that, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so sorry that I haven't had any actual PaletteMAS trying videos in a few days, and I just can't promise when those are going to be back because I do not want to irritate my eyes any further. I hope that you guys are doing really well. I hope that you are continuing to stay safe and healthy. Take care of yourselves and those around you, and I cannot wait to see you in my next video. Bye guys.
Rudolph, my dear, the forecast ain't